At 36, Nathan Blackwood was the youngest billionaire on the continent, the man business magazines loved to call visionary and relentless. He owned construction firms that reshaped skylines, tech companies that predicted human behavior, and investment portfolios that governments quietly studied. His name opened doors before he reached them. His signature changed lives, sometimes for the better, sometimes not. Yet on this night, as on many nights before it, the view felt hollow. Behind him, the penthouse was immaculate. Too immaculate. The furniture was arranged by professionals who understood aesthetics better than emotion. The kitchen gleamed, untouched. The bedroom beyond the glass doors was pristine. The bed made tight as if no one ever truly slept there. Nathan took a slow sip of whiskey and frowned. He couldn't remember when he had last enjoyed the taste. His phone buzzed on the counter. Another message. Another invitation. Another woman whose interest arrived suspiciously fast once his net worth entered the conversation. He didn't bother reading it. Earlier that evening, he had attended a charity gala. Black tie, champagne, speeches about hope and generosity. He had written a check large enough to fund an entire year of scholarships, and the applause had been thunderous. Cameras had flashed. Smiles had bloomed around him like flowers chasing sunlight. One woman, stunning and perfectly polished, had leaned close and whispered, "I love the way you live. Not you, your life." The words still clung to him like a bad scent. Nathan set the glass down and loosened the collar of his tailored shirt. The fabric alone cost more than most people earned in a month, yet it felt suffocating. Everything in his world did. He moved to the window and pressed his palm against the glass. Somewhere down there, people were laughing, struggling, loving, failing. Living lives that felt raw and unfiltered. Lives untouched by press releases and quarterly reports. When had he stopped feeling anything real? His mind drifted backward to the early days, before the money multiplied faster than he could count. He remembered working late nights with a small team, eating cheap food, sleeping on office couches, dreaming loudly. Back then, people had believed in him, not his valuation. Conversations had been messy and passionate. Failures had hurt, but victories had tasted sweet. Now everything tasted the same. Nathan exhaled slowly and closed his eyes. He had tried everything the world suggested when success turned sour. Vacations to places people couldn't pronounce. Cars that could outrun fear. Relationships that looked perfect in photographs and fell apart in private. Nothing stuck. There was a quiet knock at the door. His assistant, Miriam, stepped in cautiously. "Sir, the car is ready if you want to head out. Or, I can cancel." Nathan opened his eyes. "Cancel," he said without turning. She hesitated. "You've been working nonstop for months." "Maybe." "Miriam," he interrupted gently. "Have you ever been loved for who you are, not what you have?" The question startled her. She paused, then answered honestly. "Yes." Nathan nodded once. "Good. Hold on to that." When the door closed behind her, the silence returned, heavier than before. He walked to his study, where framed magazine covers lined one wall. His face stared back at him from different years, always composed, always confident. Billionaire builder, market disruptor, power player. He didn't recognize the man in those frames. Nathan sat at his desk and opened a drawer few people knew existed. Inside lay a thin notebook, plain, worn, unimpressive. He had kept it since his early 20s, back when writing helped him think. He flipped to a blank page. "What do you want?" he wrote. The pen hovered. For once, the answer came without calculation. To be chosen, not admired, not envied. Chosen. Nathan leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. The realization settled deep and uncomfortable. Every relationship he'd had in the past decade had been infected by doubt. Did they like his laugh or his penthouse? His thoughts or his power? Even when affection felt genuine, suspicion poisoned it. And suspicion, he knew, made intimacy impossible. He closed the notebook and stood abruptly. The idea came to him not as a fully formed plan, but as a whisper, dangerous, reckless, irresistible. What if he removed the money? What if he stepped out of the world that worshipped his name and entered one where it meant nothing? The thought sent a strange thrill through him. Fear followed quickly, but beneath it was relief. The kind you feel when you finally admit the truth. Nathan crossed the room and pulled open his wardrobe. Rows of designer suits stared back at him like soldiers awaiting orders. He pushed them aside and reached for an old duffel bag hidden in the back. A relic from years ago, when he still packed for himself. He didn't stop to overthink it. By dawn, he had made arrangements that would shock the boardrooms if they ever knew. Legal safeguards, temporary transfers of authority, instructions sealed and precise. He chose one lawyer he trusted with his life and told him just enough to ensure silence. "I need time," Nathan said. "And privacy." "How long?" the lawyer asked carefully. "As long as it takes to find the truth." The man studied him, then nodded. "Then don't look back." By the time the sun rose, Nathan Blackwood, the billionaire, the icon, the untouchable, was already fading from the city's consciousness. He showered, dressed simply, and stood one last time in the penthouse living room. For a moment, nostalgia tugged at him. He had built this life with discipline and sacrifice. Walking away felt almost disrespectful, but staying felt worse. Nathan locked the door behind him and rode the elevator down alone. No security detail, no entourage, just a man carrying a bag and a question too big to ignore. Outside, the city smelled different at ground level. Dust, sweat, street food, rain-soaked concrete. The sounds were louder, messier, more alive. He took a breath. From this moment on, Nathan Blackwood would not exist. He would be someone else. Someone ordinary. Someone invisible. Someone who might finally be loved for who he was. And with that fragile hope beating in his chest, he stepped into the crowd, unaware that his life, his real life, was only just beginning. The city woke up without noticing it had lost one of its gods. By 8 o'clock that morning, financial networks were already running their usual segments. Market trends, mergers, political forecasts. Nathan Blackwood's name didn't come up once. There were no alarms, no breaking news banners, no panicked headlines. The world, it seemed, had learned to function without pausing for him. And that, oddly enough, brought Nathan a quiet sense of relief. He stood in the bathroom of a cheap roadside motel on the edge of the city, staring at his reflection in a mirror spotted with age and water stains. The lighting was harsh, unflattering. It revealed lines around his eyes he had never noticed before, shadows beneath them that spoke of years spent chasing numbers instead of sleep. This was the last place anyone would look for him. The duffel bag lay open on the narrow bed behind him. Inside were only the bare essentials. 2 pairs of worn jeans, plain shirts, thick socks, heavy boots, a jacket that had clearly lived a harder life than he had. He had bought them at a discount store the night before, choosing items that blended rather than stood out. No labels, no polish. Nathan reached for the electric clippers he'd bought on impulse and turned them on. The buzzing filled the room, loud and final. He hesitated only a second before running them through his hair. Locks fell into the sink. With each pass, the man in the mirror looked less like the face on magazine covers and more like someone you'd pass on the street without a second glance. When he finished, he splashed water on his face and studied the result. Ordinary. Good. He wrapped his old designer clothes in plastic and pushed them to the back of the closet. They felt like costumes now, relics from a role he no longer wanted to play. Before leaving, Nathan pulled out his phone, the last tether to the life he was abandoning. Dozens of unread messages waited. Board members, journalists, acquaintances checking in with carefully worded concern. He powered the device off. Then, after a moment's thought, he removed the SIM card and snapped it in half. The sound was sharp, satisfying. Outside, the air was cool and heavy with early morning fog. Nathan slung the duffel bag over his shoulder and walked toward the main road, where trucks rumbled past and buses hissed to a stop. No one looked at him twice. He caught a ride on an overcrowded bus heading toward the industrial district. The seats were torn, the windows streaked with grime, the air thick with the smell of fuel and sweat. People squeezed in close, guarding bags and thoughts alike. Nathan stood gripping a metal pole, swaying with the movement of the bus. A woman beside him clutched a sack of vegetables. A teenage boy slept against the window, earbuds dangling uselessly. No one cared who he was. The realization loosened something tight inside his chest. When the bus dropped him near the labor yard, the sun was fully up. The place buzzed with rough energy. Men gathered in clusters, voices loud and hopeful, eyes sharp with competition. This was where daily work was offered. No questions asked, no guarantees given. Nathan hesitated at the edge of the lot. This was it, the point of no return. He stepped forward. A thick-set man with a clipboard and a permanent scowl scanned the crowd. Anyone with experience lifting steel? Concrete? Demolition? Hands shot up. Nathan raised his two, heart thudding. The man's eyes flicked over him. Name? Nathan opened his mouth. For a heartbeat, the truth hovered dangerously close. Then he said, Caleb. The name felt strange on his tongue. Foreign but light, unburdened. Caleb what? The man asked. Nathan met his gaze steadily. Just Caleb. The man snorted. Fine. You strong? Nathan nodded. I'll manage. By mid-morning, his muscles were screaming. The work was relentless. Hauling materials, clearing debris, learning on the fly under sharp instructions and sharper tempers. Sweat soaked through his shirt. Dust coated his skin, settling into places he didn't know existed. This wasn't the clean exhaustion of a gym workout or a planned endurance challenge. This was survival-level labor, the kind done because bills didn't wait and hunger didn't negotiate. More than once, Nathan nearly quit. But pride, real pride, not the polished kind, kept him going. When the foreman handed him his pay at the end of the day, it was a small stack of crumpled bills. The amount would have been meaningless to Nathan Blackwood. To Caleb, it felt earned. As the sun dipped low, the men dispersed in different directions. Some headed home. Others drifted toward shelters, street corners, or cheap hostels. Nathan followed a group toward an underpass, where cardboard mats and thin blankets marked claimed spots. This, he realized, was where he would sleep. The first night was the hardest. The concrete was unforgiving, cold seeping through layers of clothing and skin. Every sound felt amplified. Passing cars, distant sirens, murmured conversations. Nathan lay awake, staring at the underside of the bridge, his body aching in protest. Fear crept in then. What was he doing? This was madness. He could walk away at any moment, return to warmth and comfort, erase this experiment like a bad dream. But he didn't move. Instead, he listened to the man beside him muttering in his sleep, to the coughs and sighs of people whose lives had narrowed to surviving one day at a time. For the first time, Nathan understood something no report or statistic had ever taught him. Struggle was not abstract. It had a smell, a sound, a weight. Days passed. Caleb learned quickly how to stretch every meal, how to avoid trouble, how to read people without inviting questions. He learned which shelters were safe, which foremen paid fairly, which streets to avoid after dark. He learned humility. Conversations came easily here. Men talked about lost jobs, broken families, small victories. No one bragged about success. Survival was accomplishment enough. At night, Nathan sometimes pulled out his old notebook and wrote by the light of a street lamp. I am disappearing, he wrote one evening. And for the first time, I don't feel lost. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling shift, he sat on the curb, head bowed, exhaustion pressing down on him like a physical force. His stomach growled painfully. A shadow fell across him. Hey! A woman's voice said gently. You hungry? Nathan looked up. She held a small paper bag, her expression open and unguarded. There was no judgment in her eyes, only recognition. Yes, he said, surprised by the honesty in his voice. She handed him the bag and smiled. Eat. You look like you've had a long day. Her name, she told him, was Alara James. And without knowing it, she had just stepped into the life of a man who had given up everything, except the hope that someone someday would see him as he truly was. Morning arrived without ceremony. There was no alarm clock, no soft music timed to sunrise, no assistant knocking gently at the door with a schedule already prepared. Instead, Caleb woke to the rumble of trucks overhead and the ache of his own body protesting the hard concrete beneath him. His shoulders felt as though they had been hammered through the night. His hands were stiff, the skin already roughened and cracked despite only a few days of labor. He sat up slowly, blinking against the pale light filtering under the bridge. Around him, men were already stirring, folding thin blankets, stuffing belongings into battered bags, stretching with practiced resignation. No one complained. Complaining didn't make the day easier. Caleb rubbed his face and exhaled. This, he realized, was ground level. Not the metaphorical kind people talked about in interviews, but the literal, unforgiving truth of it. Life down here did not wait for comfort or permission. It moved whether you were ready or not. By the time he reached the labor yard, the air was thick with dust and anticipation. The foreman barked instructions, assigning teams without ceremony. Caleb joined a group tasked with clearing debris from a half-demolished building. The structure loomed like a skeleton, steel ribs exposed, concrete shattered into jagged chunks that scraped skin and pride alike. Work began immediately. Caleb lifted, hauled, dragged. Sweat streamed down his back, soaking through his shirt before the sun climbed high. Each movement demanded his full attention. One wrong step could mean injury or worse. He watched the other men carefully, learning through imitation rather than instruction. No one here explained things twice. During a short break, he sat on a pile of bricks and flexed his aching fingers. A man beside him, lean with graying hair and a scar cutting through his eyebrow, offered him a canteen. "First week?" the man asked. Caleb nodded. "That obvious?" The man chuckled. "You still flinch when you bend. Name's Isaac." "Caleb." Isaac studied him for a moment. "You work like someone who's afraid of quitting." The word struck deeper than Caleb expected. "Maybe," he said quietly. Isaac shrugged. "Whatever keeps you moving." They worked side by side for the rest of the day. Isaac spoke sparingly, but when he did, it was with dry humor and sharp insight. He had been in construction for decades, drifting from job to job as projects ended and cities changed. "People think this work makes you invisible," Isaac said at one point, lifting a slab with practiced ease. "Truth is, it shows you exactly who's real. Everyone else is too busy pretending." Caleb carried those words with him long after the shift ended. That evening, he washed up at a public tap, scrubbing dust and sweat from his skin as best he could. His reflection in the metal basin startled him again. Not because he looked worse, but because he looked honest, stripped of polish and pretense. As he dried his hands on his shirt, he spotted Alara across the street. She stood near a small folding table, handing out food to a loose line of people: construction workers, street vendors, the homeless. Her movements were efficient but gentle, her voice calm as she greeted each person. Caleb hesitated. He didn't want charity, not from her, but hunger overruled pride. When his turn came, she looked up and smiled, the same unguarded smile from the day before. "You made it back," she said. "Barely," he replied, attempting humor. "I'm still learning which muscles I actually need." She laughed softly. "That part never really gets easier." He accepted the food and sat nearby, watching as she worked. She knew names, asked about injuries, remembered preferences. No clipboard, no camera, just presence. When the crowd thinned, she joined him on the curb. "You didn't ask many questions yesterday," Caleb said. She shrugged. "People usually answer more honestly when you don't interrogate them." They ate in companionable silence for a moment. The streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across the pavement. "What do you do?" he asked finally. "I work at a clinic," Alara said. "Not far from here. Community health. Long hours, low pay, lots of paperwork." "Why do this too?" He gestured at the table. She followed his gaze. "Because health doesn't end at the clinic door. And because someone once did it for me." He glanced at her, curiosity deepening. "Rough past." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Something like that. Caleb recognized the deflection. He respected it. Over the next few days, their paths crossed often. Sometimes she brought food. Sometimes she simply stopped to talk. Caleb found himself looking forward to those moments with an intensity that surprised him. She never asked why he lived under a bridge. Never suggested he could do better if he just tried harder. She treated him as a man in transition, not a problem to be solved. At night, lying beneath the bridge, Caleb thought about his old life with a growing sense of distance. The meetings, the negotiations, the endless pursuit of growth. Down here, growth looked different. It looked like learning how to stretch a meal, how to offer help without pride, how to accept kindness without suspicion. One evening, after a particularly hard day, Caleb arrived at the usual spot to find Alara already packing up. "You're late," she said lightly. "Foreman kept us longer," he replied. "Deadlines." She nodded. "Everything has deadlines." They walked together for a short distance, the city noise softening around them. "Do you ever regret it?" Caleb asked suddenly. She stopped. "Regret what?" "Not choosing an easier life." Alara considered him for a long moment. "Easy isn't always safe," she said. "And comfort can be a cage." The words hit him like a confession he hadn't known he was waiting to hear. That night, Caleb wrote in his notebook again. "I am learning that value isn't proven by what you can buy." He wrote that it's proven by who shows up when there's nothing to gain. As days turned into weeks, his body adapted. His hands hardened. His movements grew confident. He learned to laugh at mistakes and to accept correction without resentment. More importantly, he learned to listen. To Isaac's stories. To Alara's silences. To the city's unfiltered rhythm. He was still hiding. Still lying by omission. But for the first time, the lie felt fragile. Because at ground level, truth had a way of rising slowly, inevitably, through even the thickest layers of concrete. And Caleb knew, with a certainty that unsettled him, that whatever he was building here would change him forever. Alara James had a way of noticing things most people missed. Caleb realized this the first time he saw her pause mid-conversation with someone else just to adjust the scarf slipping from an elderly woman's shoulders. Or the way she remembered which man preferred tea without sugar, which one limped on his left leg, which boy pretended not to be hungry but always hovered near the food table the longest. She saw people, not as burdens, not as statistics, as individuals carrying stories they didn't always have words for. Caleb watched her from a distance at first, unsure why her presence unsettled him so deeply. It wasn't just her kindness. He had known kind people before. It was her steadiness. The way she seemed rooted, as though life could shake her but not uproot her. One evening, after the food had been packed away and the street quieted, Alara sat beside him on the curb with a paper cup of tea she had saved. "You look less tense today," she said. Caleb glanced at her, surprised. "Do I usually look tense?" She smiled faintly. "You carry your shoulders like you're bracing for impact." He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Old habit. She didn't ask where it came from. That, he was beginning to understand, was part of her magic. They began walking together after her volunteer rounds. Nothing dramatic, just slow steps along familiar streets. Their conversations unfolded naturally, like pages turning on their own. Caleb told her about the work, about Isaac, about how strange it felt to wake up sore and exhausted yet somehow satisfied. He avoided details about his past, sticking to truths that didn't expose the lie. He had left a former life behind. He wanted something simpler. Alara listened without interrupting, her gaze steady, thoughtful. "I think," she said once, "that people underestimate how brave it is to start over." The words lingered between them. At the clinic, Alara was different, but only slightly. More focused, sharper. Patients trusted her instinctively. She spoke to them in a way that made even bad news feel manageable. Caleb visited once, bringing a coworker who had injured his hand. He watched as Alara cleaned the wound, her movements confident and gentle. "You should rest," she told the man firmly. "If you don't, it'll get worse." The man sighed. "Rest doesn't pay rent." Alara met his gaze. Neither does losing your hand. Afterward, Caleb teased her. You don't leave much room for argument. She shrugged. Health doesn't negotiate. He admired that about her, the balance between compassion and resolve. As the days passed, their bond deepened in quiet ways. Shared meals, shared silences, moments of laughter that surprised them both. Caleb noticed how she never spoke badly about anyone. Even when frustrated, she framed people's flaws with understanding rather than judgment. You don't get angry? He asked one night. She considered the question carefully. I do. I just don't let anger decide who people are. That answer stayed with him. But beneath her calm exterior, Caleb sensed something guarded. Sometimes her smile faded too quickly. Sometimes her gaze drifted when conversations brushed close to family or childhood. One night, as they sat watching traffic crawl past, Caleb ventured gently, Do you ever get tired of being strong? Alara's fingers tightened around her cup. Yes, she said softly. But being strong is often the only option. She didn't elaborate and he didn't push. He understood too well the cost of revealing everything. Still, guilt crept in. She was showing him herself in pieces, carefully, honestly, and he was offering only fragments in return. Caleb began to dread the day she would ask the questions he was avoiding. One afternoon, rain poured suddenly, forcing them to take shelter beneath a shop awning. The street emptied, the city momentarily hushed. Alara laughed as she brushed water from her hair. Guess the weather didn't check our plans. Caleb smiled, then caught himself simply watching her. The curve of her mouth, the strength in her posture, the warmth that seemed to radiate even on cold days. You're staring, she said, amused. Sorry, he said quickly. Just thinking. Dangerous hobby, she replied. Worth it, he said before he could stop himself. Their eyes met, and something shifted. It wasn't dramatic, no grand declaration, no sudden kiss. Just a quiet understanding settling into place. From that moment on, everything felt slightly different. They walked closer, laughed easier. Silences grew more comfortable. Caleb found himself wanting to protect her joy, to ease the sadness he sensed beneath her strength. At night, lying beneath the bridge, he wrestled with his conscience. He told himself he wasn't lying, just waiting. Waiting for the right time, the right moment, the right version of himself. But the truth pressed heavier each day. Alara deserved honesty, and yet the fear was paralyzing. If she knew who he really was, what he had been, would she look at him the same way? Or would everything they were building crumble under the weight of wealth and deception? One evening, she surprised him by asking, Do you ever miss the life you left? He hesitated, choosing his words with care. Sometimes, but not enough to go back. She nodded slowly. Then you made the right choice. Her confidence in him felt like a gift he wasn't sure he deserved. As weeks passed, Caleb realized something both beautiful and terrifying. Alara loved people not for what they offered, but for who they were when no one was watching. And if she ever discovered the truth, she would feel the betrayal deeply. Still, when she smiled at him, when she leaned into his shoulder as they sat side by side, the future felt possible in a way it never had before. For the first time, Caleb wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply trying to be worthy, and Alara, without even knowing it, was slowly teaching him what that meant. Love did not arrive with ceremony. There were no flowers, no dramatic confessions, no promises whispered under stars. It crept in quietly, settling between Caleb and Alara in the spaces where effort ended and ease began. It showed itself in routine, in the way Alara began saving an extra portion of food without asking if he would come, in the way Caleb adjusted his pace to match hers during their evening walks, instinctively slowing when she grew tired after long clinic shifts, in the way silence no longer felt like something that needed to be filled. Caleb noticed the change before he was ready to name it. One evening, after work left his muscles trembling with exhaustion, he arrived at the curb where Alara usually sat, only to find her already there, staring absently at the street. She looked tired in a way that went beyond physical fatigue. You okay? He asked, lowering himself beside her. She hesitated, then nodded. Just a long day. He accepted that answer even though he knew it wasn't the whole truth. Instead, he offered what he could, his presence. He sat with her, shoulder close but not touching, letting the quiet do the work words couldn't. After a while, she sighed. Thank you. For what? For not asking more. Caleb smiled faintly. I'm good at not asking. She glanced at him. That doesn't sound like a compliment. It's a survival skill, he said lightly. She studied him, then nodded as if understanding something deeper than his words. They grew closer in small, unremarkable ways. Caleb learned which days the clinic overwhelmed her most. Tuesdays, when paperwork piled high and funding frustrations surfaced. Alara learned that Caleb became quieter when he was worried, that he coped by keeping his hands busy and his thoughts private. She noticed his discipline, how he never complained, even when clearly in pain, how he shared what little he earned without hesitation, how he listened, not waiting for his turn to speak, but truly listening. You weren't raised like this? She said one night, almost casually. Caleb stiffened. Like what? Struggling, she clarified. You adapt too quickly. Most people fight it longer. He chose his words carefully. I was raised to work hard, just in different ways. She seemed satisfied with that. What she didn't see was the war inside him. Caleb lay awake most nights, staring at the concrete above him, guilt pressing heavy against his ribs. Alara was letting him into her world piece by piece. Her dreams, her disappointments, her quiet hopes for the future. And he was giving her only what fit the lie. She told him once, during a rare moment of vulnerability, I've learned not to build my life around people who can disappear. The words landed like a warning. Caleb almost told her then. Almost. But fear whispered louder. What if she loved him because she thought he had nothing? What if the truth changed everything? One evening, Alara invited him to walk her home. Home turned out to be a modest apartment above a closed tailoring shop. The stairwell smelled faintly of old fabric and cleaning soap. Inside, the space was small but warm. Plants on the windowsill, books stacked neatly, framed sketches taped to the walls. You draw? Caleb asked, surprised. She smiled shyly. When I need to breathe. He studied the sketches, people mostly, faces caught mid-expression. Honest, unpolished. You're good, he said. She shrugged. I draw what I see. The implication lingered. She offered him tea, apologizing for the chipped mugs. He laughed, saying he liked them better that way. And he meant it. As they sat together, knees nearly touching, Caleb felt the urge to reach for her, and the restraint not to. Love, he was learning, was not about taking what you wanted. It was about choosing patience. You ever think about the future? She asked suddenly. All the time, he answered honestly. What do you see? Caleb hesitated. If he spoke freely, his answers would expose him. I see stability, he said slowly. Purpose. A life that feels real. She nodded, satisfied. That's enough for me. The simplicity of her answer broke something open inside him. Caleb began noticing the contrast between her life and the one he'd left behind. Alara found joy in small victories. A patience-improved test result. A successful fundraiser. A plant blooming after weeks of care. Her happiness wasn't loud. It was steady. It made him rethink everything he once believed about fulfillment. One afternoon, after receiving his pay, Caleb stood outside a shop window, staring at the amount in his hand. The money was barely enough to cover basic needs. Still, he felt richer than he had in years. That night, when he apologized for not being able to take her anywhere special, Alara frowned. Why do you keep saying that? She asked. Because I don't have much, he said quietly. She turned to face him fully. Caleb, I don't need much. I need honesty. I need consistency. I need someone who shows up. He swallowed hard. I show up, he said. I know, she replied softly. That's why I'm here. They didn't define their relationship. There was no label, no agreement. But something unmistakable had formed between them, a partnership rooted in choice rather than convenience. Still, cracks appeared. Sometimes, Caleb caught her watching him with quiet curiosity, as if sensing layers beneath his words. Sometimes she asked questions that skimmed dangerously close to the truth. "You talk like someone who's used to control," she said once. "I used to manage things," he replied vaguely. "Things?" she pressed. "Responsibilities," he corrected. She didn't push further, but the look in her eyes told him she hadn't forgotten. Love, Caleb realized, was not easing his burden. It was sharpening it. The deeper he fell for Alara, the heavier the truth became. One night, after she fell asleep beside him on a bench under the stars, her head resting against his shoulder, Caleb stared ahead with a mix of peace and panic. He wanted this life. He wanted her. But he could no longer pretend the lie was harmless. Love without comfort was beautiful, but love without truth was fragile. And Caleb knew, with aching certainty, that the moment of reckoning was drawing closer. The first sign came quietly. Alara dismissed it as exhaustion. Another long day at the clinic, another argument with administrators over supplies they didn't have and patients who couldn't wait. She laughed it off when her hands trembled slightly as she packed away files. She waved away concern when a dull ache settled behind her eyes and refused to leave. Caleb noticed anyway. He always did. "You're pushing too hard," he said one evening as they walked side by side, the city humming around them. She smiled, tired but defiant. "People don't get sick on a schedule. Neither do emergencies. That doesn't mean you're invincible." She stopped walking and looked at him. "Someone has to be strong." The words echoed something she had said before, and something in her tone made his chest tighten. 2 days later, she collapsed. It happened in the clinic corridor, between rooms filled with voices and waiting pain. One moment she was walking briskly, clipboard in hand, issuing instructions. The next, her knees buckled and the world tilted violently away from her. Caleb arrived just as the shouting started. He had come to bring lunch, a small routine they'd formed without naming it. The bag slipped from his hand as he saw her on the floor, pale and unresponsive, a nurse kneeling beside her. "Alara!" he shouted, pushing forward. Someone tried to stop him. He barely registered it. Her skin was cold when he touched her hand. Too cold. The ambulance ride blurred into flashes of red lights and sterile urgency. Caleb sat rigidly beside her, holding her hand as machines beeped and paramedics spoke in clipped, professional tones. "She's anemic," one of them said. "Severely, and there may be complications." At the hospital, time fractured. Doctors asked questions. Forms were pushed toward him. Words like tests, admission, treatment floated in the air, heavy and ominous. Then came the pause. The look exchanged between staff. "We'll need to discuss payment," a woman at the desk said gently. "Before we proceed further." Caleb stared at her. Payment. The word landed like a blow. He nodded numbly and stepped aside, heart hammering. The costs were explained in careful tones, softened by practiced empathy. The numbers were not outrageous by the standards of the world he had left, but they were impossible for the man he was pretending to be. Caleb's hands shook as he stepped into the hallway and leaned against the wall. His phone, cheap, anonymous, felt useless in his pocket. One call. That was all it would take. One call and everything would change. The bills would vanish. The best doctors would appear. Alara would be safe. And the lie would end. He pressed his forehead against the cool wall, breathing hard. The conflict tore through him with brutal clarity. If he paid, questions would come. If he didn't, she could suffer or worse. The choice wasn't a choice at all. Still, he hesitated. Fear whispered that if Alara woke up to see the truth, she would look at him differently forever. That the life they had built would crumble under the weight of what he had hidden. But love, real love, did not protect itself at the expense of the beloved. Caleb slid down the wall and sat on the floor, head in his hands. "I'm sorry," he murmured, though he didn't know to whom. He stood up, not as Caleb, but not yet as Nathan either. That night, Alara lay unconscious, machines keeping careful watch as doctors stabilized her condition. Caleb sat beside her bed until visiting hours ended, memorizing the rise and fall of her chest, the faint crease between her brows even in sleep. He left the hospital just after midnight. The city felt sharper than usual, the air cutting cold against his skin. He walked until he reached a quiet street and stopped beneath a flickering streetlight. Then he made the call. The voice on the other end went silent the moment he spoke his real name. Within an hour, the machinery of his former life was moving again. Efficient, relentless, unquestioning. Private specialists were contacted. Accounts unlocked. Instructions issued. By dawn, the hospital would be a different place. Caleb returned to the bridge and didn't sleep. He sat there as the sky lightened, replaying every moment that had led him here, every half-truth, every silence, every time Alara had trusted him without reservation. When morning came, he washed, shaved, and stood staring at his reflection in the dull metal of a public restroom mirror. The man staring back at him looked older, resolved. He walked to a tailor's shop as soon as it opened. Not one of his old haunts, just a modest place where suits were bought, not worshipped. He chose something simple, clean, well-fitted, no excess. By the time he reached the hospital again, whispers were already spreading. Staff moved differently, straighter, faster. Doctors greeted him with sudden attentiveness. Caleb no longer existed here. He stepped into Alara's room just as she stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first. She frowned slightly, confusion knitting her brows. "Caleb?" she murmured. His heart fractured at the sound of his name. He moved closer to the bed, every step heavy. "Alara," he said softly. She blinked, her gaze sharpening, and then she froze. The man standing before her was familiar, but altered. The posture, the confidence held carefully in check. The suit that spoke of a world she had never associated with him. "Who are you?" she asked hoarsely. He swallowed. "My name is Nathan Blackwood," he said, "and I owe you the truth." Silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. He told her everything. Not quickly, not defensively. He spoke of the penthouse, the wealth, the loneliness that had driven him to disappear. Of choosing the name Caleb because it felt clean, unclaimed. Of meeting her and realizing, too late, how deeply he had crossed a line. Alara listened without interrupting. Her face revealed nothing. When he finished, the air between them felt altered, as if something essential had shifted out of alignment. "So," she said slowly, "everything I knew about you was an experiment?" "No," he said immediately, stepping closer. "You were never an experiment. You were the truth I didn't expect." She laughed softly, without humor. "You let me believe you were struggling, that you understood this life." "I did struggle," he said, voice breaking. "I chose it. I lived it. But I should have trusted you with who I really was." Tears welled in her eyes then. Not from awe, not from gratitude, but from hurt. "You took away my choice," she whispered. "You decided what I could know." Nathan closed his eyes. The words cut deeper than any accusation. "I know," he said, "and if you never forgive me, I'll understand." She turned her face away. "Please go," she said quietly. He stood there for a moment, torn between instinct and respect. Then he nodded. Nathan Blackwood walked out of the room alone, leaving behind the woman he loved, and the fragile life he had almost been allowed to keep. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent as ever. And for the first time since he had given up everything, Nathan wondered if the cost of his lie had been more than he could ever repay. Nathan Blackwood did not return to the bridge. He could not. The night after Alara asked him to leave the hospital room, he walked until his legs trembled and the city blurred into an indistinct wash of lights and noise. He ended up in a quiet park just before dawn, sitting on a cold bench as joggers passed him without a glance. The suit he wore, simple, restrained, felt heavier than any cement sack he had carried as Caleb, because now it wasn't a disguise. It was proof. By morning, the story had begun to ripple outward. Hospital staff whispered. Administrators made sudden appearances. Doctors spoke his name with a careful mix of respect and awe. Somewhere between paperwork and policy meetings, the truth of who had paid for Alara's care became impossible to hide. Nathan ensured everything was covered, every test, every procedure, every follow-up appointment. He arranged for the best specialists, not with grand announcements, but with quiet efficiency. He made one thing clear to everyone involved. No press, no donor's plaque, no acknowledgement. They agreed without question. But Alara knew, and that knowledge sat between them like a wall neither of them knew how to climb. She refused to see him. Days passed. Nathan stayed in a modest hotel near the hospital, declining invitations from board members who had suddenly resurfaced, alarmed by his reappearance. He ignored calls, silenced notifications, and let the machinery of his old life idle without him. Every morning, he went to the hospital cafe and sat by the window, watching people come and go. Every afternoon, he asked the nurse on duty how Alara was doing. Stable, they told him. Recovering, they said later. She's asking about returning to work. One nurse added with a small smile. That sounded like her. On the fourth day, Isaac showed up. Nathan nearly didn't recognize him at first, until the man's sharp eyes locked onto his face with immediate understanding. Well, Isaac said dryly, standing in front of Nathan's table. That explains a few things. Nathan winced. I can explain. Isaac waved a hand. You don't owe me anything, but you owe her the truth. And it looks like you finally paid that debt. They sat in silence for a moment. She loved you, Isaac said bluntly. Caleb, the man who showed up when no one was watching. I still am him, Nathan replied quietly. Isaac studied him. Then prove it. Money won't do that for you. The words lingered long after Isaac left. That evening, Alara finally agreed to see him on one condition. 5 minutes. Nathan entered her room slowly, as if afraid the floor might give way beneath him. She was sitting up now, color slowly returning to her face, dark circles beneath her eyes hinting at the toll of the past days. She didn't look at him. I'm not here to argue, she said before he could speak. And I'm not here to forgive you. I wouldn't expect you to, Nathan replied. He remained standing, hands clasped loosely in front of him. I just wanted to see you, to know you're all right. She let out a breath. Physically, yes. The pause stretched. Why? She asked suddenly, finally meeting his gaze. Why not tell me from the beginning? Nathan swallowed. Because I was afraid. Afraid that if you knew who I was, you'd never see me. Just the money, the power, the expectations. And instead, she said bitterly, you let me see someone who didn't exist. He shook his head. Caleb existed. Every moment with you was real. The work, the nights, the conversations. I didn't fake those. But you controlled the truth, she said. You decided what I could and couldn't love. Her voice cracked then, and the sound cut deeper than shouting ever could. I trusted you, she whispered. Nathan took a step closer, then stopped himself. I know, and I broke that trust. I won't justify it. She studied him for a long moment, searching his face as if looking for something familiar beneath the polished edges. I don't hate you, she said finally, but I don't know how to see you without wondering what else you're hiding. There's nothing left, he said softly. You have all of me now, whether you want it or not. She looked away. That's the problem. 5 minutes passed too quickly. Before he left, Nathan placed a small notebook on the table beside her bed, the same worn one he had carried under the bridge. I wrote in this when I was Caleb, he said. Not business ideas, not plans, just thoughts. If you ever want to know who I was when I wasn't hiding behind anything, it's there. He didn't wait for her response. Outside the hospital, Nathan made another decision. He returned to the boardrooms, not to reclaim his throne, but to dismantle it. Within weeks, headlines began to appear, though his name was conspicuously absent. A major restructuring, massive divestments, controlling shares transferred into independent trusts, funding redirected into community health, housing, and labor protections. Construction companies he once owned outright were reorganized with worker representation built into leadership. Wages rose. Safety standards tightened. People speculated endlessly. Nathan said nothing. Instead, he returned to the labor yard. The men stared when he showed up in work boots and plain clothes, his hands already scarred, his posture familiar. Isaac watched him for a long moment, then nodded once. "Back again?" he asked. "For good," Nathan replied. He worked harder than ever. Not to punish himself, but to remember. Every paycheck he earned, he spent the same way he had before. He slept in modest rooms, ate simple meals. He resisted the pull of ease, not out of guilt, but out of respect for the life that had changed him. Weeks later, Elara returned to the clinic. Nathan didn't go to see her. He waited. It was a rainy evening when she found him. He was packing up tools when he felt a familiar presence behind him. He turned slowly. She looked stronger now, still thinner than before but standing tall. The notebook was tucked under her arm, its edges worn from handling. "I read it," she said. His heart thudded. "All of it." She nodded. "You were lonely." He gave a small, sad smile. "Still am." She stepped closer. "You didn't write like a man pretending to be poor. You wrote like a man trying to disappear." "That was the plan," he admitted. "And yet," she said quietly, "you found yourself instead." They stood in silence, rain misting the air between them. "I don't know if I can love Nathan Blackwood," Elara said honestly. "But I loved Caleb, and I don't believe he was a lie." Hope flickered, fragile and uncertain. "I'm not asking you to choose," Nathan said. "I just want the chance to earn your trust again, as myself." She studied him for a long moment. "Then start where you are," she said. "No disguises, no rescues, just truth." He nodded. "That's all I have left." As she walked away, she glanced back once. "We'll see," she said. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something far more precious. A beginning. Walking away from billions did not feel heroic. Felt quiet. Nathan expected resistance. Lawyers arguing, board members panicking, analysts demanding explanations. He expected headlines, outrage, speculation that would pull him back into the center of attention whether he wanted it or not. What he did not expect was how simple it felt once he began. The first meeting took place in a boardroom he had once ruled without question. Glass walls, polished table, familiar faces arranged in careful neutrality. Men and women who had built their lives alongside his, who measured worth in margins and forecasts. They waited for him to speak. "I'm stepping down," Nathan said calmly. Silence followed. One board member laughed softly, assuming it was a test. Another leaned forward, fingers steepled, already preparing a counterargument. Nathan raised a hand. "This isn't a negotiation." Questions came fast after that. About stability, about markets, about legacy. Nathan answered them patiently. He had planned this carefully, not as an emotional reaction, but as a deliberate act. Shares would be transferred to independent trusts. Leadership would be decentralized. Workers would have representation. Profits would no longer be the only metric of success. "You're dismantling your own empire," someone finally said. Nathan nodded. "Yes. And what will you do?" He thought of Elara, of the notebook, of the bridge and the labor yard. "I'll live," he said simply. By the time he left the room, the structure that had once defined his entire identity was already shifting without him. Over the following weeks, Nathan moved through his old world like a ghost. Contracts were finalized, counts restructured, properties sold or repurposed. He signed papers until his hand ached, each signature loosening another tie. He donated quietly, deliberately, clinics, shelters, training programs, housing initiatives tied directly to employment. Not as charity but as infrastructure. He refused to put his name on any of it. The penthouse was emptied last. Nathan stood in the vast living room, sunlight spilling across bare floors where furniture once sat. The echo of his footsteps felt foreign. This space had once represented arrival. Now it felt like an empty shell. He locked the door and handed the keys to a representative who barely hid their confusion. That night, Nathan slept in a modest rented room not far from the labor yard. The mattress was thin. The walls were scuffed. Rain tapped steadily against the window. He slept better than he had in years. Returning to construction was not an act of penance. It was an act of grounding. The men noticed his consistency more than anything else. He arrived early, worked hard, took correction without argument. His hands, once softened by privilege, had grown rough and capable. Isaac watched him closely. "You don't work like a man with something to prove," Isaac said one afternoon as they took a short break. "You work like a man who knows exactly where he wants to stand." Nathan wiped sweat from his brow. "I spent too long standing above everything. And now I want to stand with people." Isaac nodded, satisfied. Nathan kept his distance from Alara. Not because he didn't think about her, he did constantly, but because she had asked for truth without pressure. He would not chase forgiveness or force proximity. If there was a future, it would arrive on honest ground. He heard about her through small channels. She was back at the clinic, working reduced hours at first, then gradually resuming her full schedule. She looked stronger, more focused. The notebook he had given her stayed with her. Sometimes, after work, Nathan would walk past the clinic without stopping. He would slow for just a moment, catching a glimpse through the windows, Alara leaning over a desk, laughing softly with a colleague, fully present. He never went inside. Instead, he focused on building a life that could stand on its own, whether she returned to it or not. Months passed. The city shifted into a new season, and with it, Nathan changed too. The sharp edges of guilt softened into resolve. He no longer defined himself by what he had given up, but by what he chose daily. He learned to cook simple meals, to budget, to rest when his body demanded it, to enjoy evenings without spectacle. One night, sitting on the steps of his building, he pulled out the notebook he now carried, a new one. He wrote not to escape, but to reflect. "I thought leaving money behind would make me lighter," he wrote. "I was wrong. It made me heavier with responsibility, but also steadier." The real test came when temptation returned. An offer arrived quietly, a new venture, ethical branding, enormous returns, the kind of opportunity that would let him reclaim power without public scrutiny. He read the proposal carefully. Then he declined. Not because it was wrong, but because it wasn't necessary. That realization startled him more than anything else. One evening, as dusk settled over the city, Nathan found himself back at the curb where he and Alara had once sat so many times. The folding table was gone now, replaced by a permanent community food station funded anonymously. He sat there alone, watching people pass, feeling the weight and simplicity of his life settle into balance. "Alara would like to see you." The voice came from behind him. Nathan turned. A nurse from the clinic stood there, offering a small smile. "She said to tell you she's ready, if you are." His heart skipped, not with panic, but with calm anticipation. "Yes," he said quietly. "I am." He didn't rush. He finished his meal, cleaned up after himself, walked to the clinic with steady steps. Inside, Alara waited near the back, notebook in hand. She looked at him, not searching, not guarded, just honest. "You kept going," she said. "So did you." She nodded. "I needed to see who you were when no one was watching anymore." "And?" he asked, voice steady. She took a breath. "You walked away from everything you didn't need." He met her gaze. "Including the idea that I could earn love by rescuing you." A faint smile touched her lips. That mattered. They sat together, not touching, letting the moment exist without rushing it. "I'm still angry," she said finally. "And I'm still hurt. I expect nothing less. But I also see the man who chose truth over comfort," she continued. "And I respect that." Hope did not surge. Settled. "I don't know where this leads," she said. "Neither do I," Nathan replied. "But I know where I stand." She closed the notebook and placed it between them. "Then let's start there," she said. "Not as billionaire and clinic worker. Not as rescuer and rescued. Just two people standing on honest ground, ready to build something that didn't need to shine to be real. The first time Nathan and Alara walked together again, it felt strangely unfamiliar. Not because the streets had changed, they hadn't, but because the space between them was different now. There was no pretense, no illusion cushioning their steps. Every word carried weight. Every silence asked to be respected rather than filled. They didn't hold hands. They didn't talk about love. They talked about small things instead: the clinic struggle with staffing, a new safety rule at the construction site, the way the city smelled after rain. Ordinary conversations, anchored in the present, unburdened by promises. Nathan found comfort in the restraint. He no longer needed to perform or impress. He just needed to be consistent. Over the next weeks, their meetings became a quiet rhythm. Sometimes they shared meals. Sometimes they simply walked. Sometimes they sat in silence, watching the city do what it always did: move on. Alara observed him carefully. She noticed how he no longer flinched when money came up in conversation. How he spoke about work with grounded respect rather than detachment. How he listened without trying to fix things. One evening, she asked him directly, "Do you ever regret it?" "Which part?" he asked. "All of it," she said. "Walking away. Starting over." Nathan considered the question seriously. "I regret the lie," he said. "I regret hurting you. But the rest, no. I've never felt more like myself." She nodded, absorbing his answer without judgment. That night, she told him something she had never shared before. Her childhood had been shaped by instability. A father who left early, a mother who worked herself into illness trying to hold everything together. She learned early that people disappeared, promises broke, and survival meant depending on yourself. "I don't fall in love easily," she said quietly, "because love has always come with loss." Nathan listened, his chest tight. "I don't want to be another lesson," he said. "Then don't," she replied. "Be a choice." The words followed him long after they parted that evening. Being a choice meant something different than being needed. It meant allowing someone the freedom to walk away, and trusting that they would stay anyway. Nathan proved it in small ways. When a former associate tried to lure him back with influence and capital, he declined without hesitation. When the construction site offered him a supervisory role with better pay but more distance from the work, he asked for time to consider rather than seizing it. He wanted decisions rooted in values, not fear. Alara saw it. One afternoon, she visited the labor yard for the first time since her recovery. The men greeted her warmly, asking about her health. Isaac gave Nathan a pointed look that held both warning and approval. "You've built something good here," she said as they walked away. "I didn't build it," Nathan replied. "I joined it." She smiled at that. The true test came unexpectedly. The clinic received an offer, substantial funding, more than they had ever seen. The donor remained anonymous, but the terms were clear: expansion, modern equipment, increased salaries. Alara suspected the truth immediately. She confronted Nathan that evening. "Was it you?" she asked. He didn't evade the question. "Yes, but not as a gift to you, as a responsibility I believe in." She crossed her arms, wrestling with the answer. "You promised no rescues." "I know," he said. "That's why I didn't tell you, and why the funding has no conditions attached. If you reject it, I'll accept that." She searched his face, looking for control, for pride, for expectation. She found none. After a long pause, she nodded. "Then I'll accept it, not because of you, but because of the people it will help." Relief washed through him, quiet and profound. Later that night, they sat on a bench overlooking the city. "I need to know something," Alara said. "Ask. If I walk away tomorrow, if this is as far as I can go, will you be okay?" Nathan turned to her fully. "I'll be disappointed," he said honestly. "I'll be hurt, but I'll still be whole." She studied him for a long time. That answer mattered more than any declaration of love. Days later, Alara made her decision. She found Nathan at the labor yard just as the day was winding down. Dust clung to his clothes. His hands were calloused, steady. I don't want to live a life where I'm always waiting for someone to leave, she said. He said nothing, giving her space. I also don't want to live a life where I let fear decide for me, she continued. She stepped closer. So I'm choosing you, she said simply. Not because of who you were, not because of what you gave up, but because of who you are now. Emotion tightened his throat. I won't promise forever, she added. I'll promise honesty, effort, and the courage to leave if it stops being right. Nathan nodded, eyes bright. That's all I would ever ask. He reached for her hand, not urgently, not possessively. She took it. The city moved around them, indifferent and alive. For the first time, their future didn't feel like a question that needed answering. It felt like a choice they were making together. Love, Nathan discovered, did not arrive like a finish line. It arrived like a practice. Each morning it asked to be chosen again. Each evening it asked to be honored without spectacle. There were no trumpets announcing success, no sudden certainty that everything would remain perfect. What mattered was truth. Nathan and Alara built their life slowly, deliberately, as if laying each brick by hand. They didn't rush to move in together. They didn't announce their relationship to anyone who hadn't already seen it forming in the quiet ways they stood beside each other. Their days were full and ordinary. Nathan continued working construction, eventually accepting a supervisory role that kept him close to the work rather than above it. He learned how to lead without command, how to listen before deciding, how to step back when others needed space to grow. Alara expanded the clinic with careful intention. New rooms opened. More staff were hired. She insisted on training programs that empowered people from the community to take part in its future. She worked tirelessly but not recklessly anymore. She rested when she needed to. She asked for help. They met in the evenings, sometimes exhausted, sometimes energized, always honest. Their home, when they finally chose one, was modest. Sunlight spilled through wide windows. Books and tools shared space on shelves. A small table served as both dining surface and workspace. Plants thrived in every corner, tended with the same patience they gave their relationship. There were disagreements. Money inevitably came up, not in the way Nathan once feared, but in the way real lives demanded. Budgeting, giving, boundaries. They learned to speak openly about it, to acknowledge its power without allowing it to dominate their choices. You don't have to prove anything, Alara reminded him once when he hesitated over a purchase. I know, he said. I just don't want money to speak louder than intention. She kissed his cheek. Then let's keep listening. Nathan remained anonymous in his philanthropy. When recognition threatened to surface, he redirected it. He learned that the absence of applause was not a loss. It was freedom. Sometimes, late at night, he would think about the man he used to be. The penthouse, the influence, the ease, the version of success that had once felt inevitable. It no longer tempted him, not because it was wrong, but because it was incomplete. One evening, months into their shared life, Alara took out the old notebook, the one Nathan had given her in the hospital. I kept this, she said. I know, he replied. She flipped through the pages slowly. This man. He was searching for permission to exist. Nathan swallowed. I was. She closed the notebook. You don't need permission anymore. The realization settled into him gently, like something he had known but never named. They visited the bridge one evening, not out of nostalgia, but acknowledgement. The community station bustled with activity. Food, laughter, conversation. Nathan watched a young man accept a meal, eyes wary and hopeful all at once. He recognized himself in that expression. Alara squeezed his hand. You didn't save anyone, she said softly, but you changed the way you live. That's harder. Later that year, the city tried to reclaim him. An investigative article surfaced, piecing together fragments of his past. Speculation swirled. Journalists reached out. Invitations arrived. Nathan declined them all. When asked why, he answered simply, My life doesn't require explanation. Alara stood beside him through it all, not shielding him, not pushing him forward, just present. One rainy afternoon, as they walked home, she stopped suddenly. "Do you ever miss the idea of forever?" she asked. Nathan frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "The certainty," she said. "The guarantee." He thought about it. About contracts and assurances. About how he once tried to build permanence into everything. "I don't miss it," he said finally. "I like choosing you every day." She smiled, rain clinging to her lashes. "Good answer." They never had a grand wedding. No press. No spectacle. One quiet morning, they stood in a small room at City Hall, witnesses limited to Isaac and a clinic nurse who had become a close friend. No vows rehearsed. No promises of eternity. Just commitment spoken clearly without fear. "I choose you," Elara said. "I choose you," Nathan replied. And that was enough. Years later, when asked by a young coworker what had made him walk away from everything, Nathan answered honestly. "I didn't walk away," he said. "I walked toward something real." In the evenings, he and Elara sat together, watching the city lights flicker on. Sometimes they spoke of the past. Sometimes of the future. Often they spoke of nothing at all. Love, he learned, was not about being seen by the world. It was about being seen by one person and staying. And in that quiet, unwavering truth, Nathan Blackwood finally found the life he had been searching for all along. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to this channel and tell us where you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.